I used to have an insecurity that I was small, that I could be seen as weak, and because of that, I could be picked on. And what I developed in response to this was an overcompensation, trying to act extra tough, getting into martial arts, getting into competing, getting into fighting, making sure that nobody could think that I was that way because really I was afraid that somebody would see me like that. And as a result, everything suffered. My relationships with friends, with family, with the women I was interested in dating. Why? Because I was putting on a mask. I was putting on a disguise. I was putting a facade between me and the real world. So no one could fully trust me. And the reason why they couldn't trust you is because they weren't actually seeing me for who I was, because I wasn't letting them, because I was afraid to show that vulnerability, because in my mind, I had equated vulnerability to being small. And it all came down to a lack of trust. A lack of trust in myself, in my ability to actually, in those moments where there could be weakness coming up, there could be vulnerability showing, there could be a chance that I could not rise to the occasion. So what that unconsciously told me is that I could not rise to the big occasion. And it was only by following this path that I'm about to share with you right now that I was able to overcome this. So the first path that we have to get into is the path of most resistance. This is broken down into whatever is the most complex, whatever is the most intimidating, and whatever is the most boring. I get this framework from one of my big mentors, Pierre de Souza. You can go and check him out on YouTube. And with this distinction, this is the bread and butter of this method of feeling small, weak, and helpless. Because you'll find, unless you're in a very specific scenario, you don't feel this way all the time. In fact, there are certain trigger points, there's certain areas, there's certain ways of thinking, scenarios, places, sometimes they can even be people that trigger it with you. Sometimes it's a family member, sometimes it can be like being back at your family home, other times it can be at your job, other times, a lot of the time for men, it's about speaking to women you feel attracted to and being intimidated by beauty. Without this path, you can't actually really figure out where this area is, and you just have a really general sense of just feeling weak, helpless, small, boyish, whatever you want to call it. So you need to identify the three parts of this path. Like I said, whatever is the most complex, whatever is the most intimidating, whatever is the most boring. The reason you do this is because in each of these paths will be your greatest challenges. So take an example. One of the paths that actually included all of this was part of my identity back in the day was to kind of always push the intensity barrier. And the intensity barrier in conversation. So saying things that are a little bit outlandish, saying things that are a little bit harsh, a little bit critical. And actually the reason that I was doing this is because whenever social anxiety or intimidation would get the better of me, I knew that if I pushed to an intense level, that I would be more comfortable there than the other person. So that's why I used to do it. It was actually a way to keep myself comfortable, to keep myself safe. So actually, one of my homeworks when I was working with one of my mentors was to actually be in conversation, but have my awareness on myself and my mind first. Because what would happen is I would have these contractions come up in my mind. I would have this feeling of vulnerability, this feeling of kind of being overpowered by the situation. And it's in that contraction that I would then push back outwards. And what my homework was to relax that, was to stay with that feeling, that emotion, that thought, and not act on it. And instead say the safe thing. So this was extremely boring because it took out a lot of the dopamine spikes I had when speaking to people, which would then just go on to alienate me further and further I got in the conversation. It was also in some ways the most difficult and the most complex, because what I was essentially doing was a behavioral modality. I was literally changing my behavior, but from a very conscious place. Okay, and it was difficult and complex because sometimes I would get into all these loops like, oh yeah, but this is the correct thing to say, or this is what I want to say, this is authentic. And instead I had to come back to the bare bones basics of the practice. And then it was also the most intimidating because the whole reason I was doing this is because I was being intimidated by the environment, by the person, or by myself. And this was a way to make myself be more comfortable in a very roundabout way. And when I took that away, and I was no longer being intimidated, and I was no longer giving myself this get out of jail free card, it was intimidating for me just to chill, or for me to be under scrutiny, for me to be under that kind of intensity of relating, because it also related to a bit of my avoidance patterns. And over this time period, I was able to, which was about a year, I was able to completely rewire what was going on. And what it actually led to was people feeling more safe around me, opening up more around me, being more vulnerable. And it also made me more confident because I no longer was acting from the place of, I'm being intimidated, I feel small, let me act out on this. Instead, I was being intimidated and I was being okay with that. And there was then, because I was being okay with that, there was no need to feel small anymore. And because there was no need to feel small anymore, then I stopped feeling small in social conversation. So if you feel small in group settings or when speaking to a person you're attracted to, a woman you're attracted to, a man you're attracted to, or if you were just simply intimidated asking for what you want is a very common thing, then identify the biggest levers, like the practice I just gave you, about what would have the biggest impact on you if it was to change. For me, it was very simple. For me, it was to chill out on those behaviors and get more comfortable in the mundane boringness and just comfortable conversation, which people need in order to trust you, feel vulnerable, safe, open up to you, and then connect with you in whatever way, whether it's professional, social, or romantic. You have to identify which is the best behavior for you, okay? And for me, that was all three of those, but for you, it might look different. For somebody else, like for one of my clients who gets overly analytical and critical of himself, there was a lot of different things that we did, but one of the behavioral modalities we did was coming back to compassion, making sure that he remembered that he had himself no matter what. Because when you're backing yourself, there is nothing really that can faze you. Everyone else's opinion, they only highlight our own insecurities in and of ourselves. And if we don't have any, or if we have insecurities but we're okay with them, then another person pointing them out isn't going to make that much of an impact. The second part of this, if we just talked about behavior, we have to look at what's causing these behaviors. And what's causing these behaviors are insecurities. They're limiting beliefs. They're our identity. And the good thing is that our identity isn't fixed. Our identity can change, and it does change all of the time. But because we're so used to a certain limiting belief or an insecurity about ourselves, we get accustomed to it, we get used to it, we get comfortable with it. And the big part of relieving insecurities is actually realizing that this thing is not making you more comfortable, it's making you more uncomfortable. And the best way to understand insecurities is to split them into three different types. There's introjections, you can call these beliefs. There's projections, they also come from beliefs, but they work differently. And then there's parts of us in ourselves. This is stuff like IFS, this is stuff like reparenting. It's essentially parts or identities or perspectives within ourselves that are clashing with the rest of us. So a classic example of this is you want to go and eat in one restaurant, and then there's another part of you telling you want to go eat in another restaurant. This isn't an insecurity or a shadow. This is just there's more than one perspective in you that could be interested in doing one or more things. The problem comes is that when this is fueled by an insecurity. So introjection, the path of healing for an introjection is to give these beliefs back. At some point if you feel small or you feel weak or you feel helpless, most likely it's because you have learnt over a period of time, or sometimes it can be a snap thing, from a place, a thing, a narrative, it can be from a family, that you are supposed to act this way in a certain situation. And when you can identify where that comes from, you give it back. The second is a projection. They also come from the same place. However, it's when we are giving our power away to another external thing or a person or a place. I'll give you an example. So where an introjection can be when it's in a social situation, I can't handle that, and that makes us feel small. A projection would be something like when I'm in a social situation, everyone else has a better idea of what they want to say, so I'll just let them run the conversation. We are giving our empowerment to the other people, and the healing process for this is to take it back. Now, the last part, which is parts work, which is like the example of the restaurant, with this, there has to be a coming together, there has to be a unification, there has to be a realization that you're both on the same team and you're both playing on the same team. Because when that happens, two becomes one, and all of that energy, that friction, that divide, that, I know I want to do this, but I'm not sure I'm able to, all of that energy that gets used there comes together, and you can use it now, and you can use that with extra clarity and extra conviction. And if you want a real detailed breakdown or step-by-step guide on how you can actually do this, then in the link below, I have my full shadow work program. I haven't seen anything this comprehensive for free online anywhere. That's why I made it. All it's going to cost is your email. You also get signed up to my email list where you won't find the content in that email anywhere else, including on this YouTube, because that will take you through the entire method I do for myself and my one-on-one clients to help them break through years or even decades of stagnation and shadow and insecurity. And you can do that for yourself. Free is the concept of becoming anti-fragile. We need this concept, we need this intention, because a lot of the time when we're trying to feel small, what do we say? We're going to want to feel big. You want to feel big, you want to feel powerful, you want to feel strong. The problem is that most of the time, because we haven't dealt with the insecurity, so go and deal with the insecurity, is this comes from an overcompensation like I described at the start of this video. And with this overcompensation, there's still a fear that we are that thing. So actually, the goal is not to ever not be in vulnerable or fragile situations. The goal is to become just as comfortable feeling fragile, feeling weak, feeling vulnerable as when you feel strong. When you get this, you reach a different level of confidence. You reach a different level of equanimity. You reach a place where you become completely unfazed, and not in a detached way. Not in a way where you have to shut down your emotions. Not in a way where you have to suppress your thoughts. You become you, but because you are not, imagine this. Imagine you're in a competition and you're in the finals. And it truly doesn't matter to you, your opinion of yourself, whether you lose or you win. It doesn't not matter to you in the sense that this is not something that's important to you, but there's no fear or insecurity that you're going to lose. Do you think you're going to put more on the line and be less cagey and be more free and be more creative and be more empowered, or be less? Be honest with yourself. That is becoming anti-fragile. And the way you do that is you go through the path of most resistance, you feel that fragility, and you feel yourself not being okay with that. That's the exposure therapy. Remember, whatever's the most boring, whatever's the most complex, whatever's the most intimidating, whilst also working on your insecurities, so those boring, complex, and intimidating scenarios don't affect you as much because you don't have insecurities for them to play on. You do that for a long, extended period of time with the goal that you're not going to become someone who doesn't feel, you're not going to become somebody who only feels good all the time. You're becoming anti-fragile. And then you add the secret sauce, which is surprising to most people listening to this, which is the fourth part of this, which is holding yourself permanently in unconditional love, compassion, and acceptance. So Carl Rogers, one of the most influential therapists of all time, came to prominence in the 1950s and 60s when the modality was to be very behavioral, like I just talked about. And behavioral was great. But he focused on the relationship he had with the client and also the relationship he had with himself. And what happened essentially was he blew all of the previous therapies out of the water, so that now almost all therapies now focus on the relationship too. Because if you're in a space where, first of all, someone's holding you in compassion and love all of the time, it makes you stronger. And there's actually been quite a few studies on this. One was over the period of 4 years, where they measured people who had self-compassion versus people who didn't have self-compassion. And what they found is the people that had self-compassion, when they went through really stressful times, so this was at a university, they were able to endure stress for longer, and they were able to endure stress at a higher peak. And then once the stressful event was over, they were able to bounce back and get back to work much, much quicker than people who didn't. So it makes you more resilient for longer at a higher intensity, and then it makes you recover much better. This is the secret sauce when it comes to feeling small, weak, or helpless. We're not trying to change the feeling. That goes away by following the path of most resistance and getting rid of your insecurities that enable you to feel small. But then also, if you're berating yourself, if you're beating yourself, if you're saying, I'm not good enough and I'm a pussy and I'm a bitch and I should never be like this and I'm such a failure and no one else feels this way and all that kind of stuff, that only makes the downward spiral of feeling small, weak, and helpless worse. And then it reinforces the fact that that is your identity. You become more attached to your identity, and then that identity sticks for longer, deeper, and it's much harder to get rid of. Whereas if you're going through that period, remember, compassion makes you go through that period for longer, makes it, you're able to endure it for much of a higher peak, and you're able to bounce back quicker. All of those three things make feeling weak and helpless less like your identity. It makes you more anti-fragile by default because you have yourself, and you know that you have yourself, and you know this isn't a big deal and you can handle it. And then it enables you to push into the homework of path of most resistance much better because you have more of a shield, you have more of a soothing system, and you're able to have more acceptance for your insecurities, which enables them to be healed faster. So these 4 points are the holy grail of allowing yourself to overcome this feeling of feeling small, weak, boyish, helpless, whatever it may be. If you want more help with that, obviously I have my free shadow work guide. I also have my Calendly link where you can book a quick 20-30 minute chat. No hard sales or selling at all. It's actually just to see where you are and how we can help you the most. And what I will say to leave it off is that this problem does not go away over time. This is something that you have to actively work on, whether it's with this or whether it's with something else. Do not delude yourself into the idea that this is something that you can just brush under the rug. Because what I learned in my journey, unfortunately, is the more you brush it under the rug, the more you learn certain body language hacks or communication frameworks or how to appear confident. Actually, what that does is it demonstrates to you that you are not good enough as you are. You never will be, and you need these things as a crutch in order to feel good, in order to feel strong, in order to feel confident. This is not what we want. We need to deal with it right now. It's confronting, but we need to deal with it. You need to deal with it. Whether it's with this or somebody else that you trust, it doesn't matter. This is not something that goes away just by hoping and praying, okay? If something's in your identity itself needs to shift through this framework that I gave you, everything on my YouTube channel too. And once your identity shifts, the symptom level problem of feeling small doesn't even not become a problem anymore. You become the type of person that this problem cannot affect.